All right. So last week we began our lecture on the concept of states. Concept of states. We defined states. We also looked at the features of a state, the distinction between state and government. Now, with regards to the features of states, we use the Montevideo Convention on the rights and duties of states to denote the four minimum criteria that entities require to be classified as states. And that denotes the declarative theory of statehood, which we discussed last week. We also did realize that to be accepted as a state, to be accepted, the constitutive theory also indicates that, well, a state may qualify as having all the four minimum criteria as mentioned in the Montevideo Convention. Yet to be admitted as a state is also a political decision. And as political scientists or comparativists, we need to understand that for an entity or a territory to be classified as a state, it needs the reasonable recognition, accepted by the international community or existing states. They need to admit you. And that is the constitutive theory of statehood. We looked at that last week. We also mentioned that the formation of statehood or the modern states was as a result of war. Before the state would come into being, there were other political organizations like feudal arrangements, empire systems, kingdoms, city-state arrangements, principalities, and the likes. And scholars have argued that if there is any single thing that accounted for this arrangement, where today the state supersedes any other organization within its territory, it is true of war. And this is well argued by Tilly, where he mentioned that war made the state and the state made war. So my dear friends, please go over your notes as we discussed last week, okay? Now today we are going to continue with the key phases in the state formation. Key phases in state formation. Now, the introduction of gunpowder in the 14th century would change military skill and tactics. And that will be the beginning of organized way of administration. You see, before the introduction of gunpowder, the kingdoms or the empires or those political organizations, they used to be protected by, you see, knights sitting on horseback and other form of voluntary arrangements. Some voluntary arrangements or some traditional means of mobilizing people for protecting the kingdoms, okay, or even if they were to go to war. But the introduction of gunpowder will change military skill and tactics, where now the kingdoms or the political entities will begin to have organized infantry and artillery. So now, for example, if we are to use contemporary words, you will say that the political organizations will now have organized, or standing with armies, armed forces with weapons, ammunitions readily available. And this arrangement will replace the old order where the kings, princes, and these monarchs were protected by knights on horseback. Knights, K-N-I-G-H-T. When we talk of knights, and this, I believe, those who know about the Roman Catholic Church, you have some, arrangements, okay, or some groups that we call them knights. And these knights, even when you check the way they dress, their dress looks more or less like that of the armed forces. They usually will carry some sword. But when you hear knights, those olden days, knights were the people who would be protecting the kings, the time. Okay, they sat on horseback, holding their sword, dressed in some kind of regalia. But the introduction of gunpowder will change this old order. And those who know about the game called chess, C-H-E-S-S, like checkmate, who knows how to play chess? Dear friends, who knows how to play chess? Okay, Samuelina. Okay, good. Fantastic. Now, when you are playing, okay, Padma also knows about it. Now, when you are playing chess, let's say Padma is playing chess with Samuelina. Now, Padma, okay, Richard is also aware. So three of you mention some of the players when you are playing chess with a colleague. What are some of the members, the players when you are engaged in the game of chess? What? Yeah. Yes, Richard.
We have the pawns, we have the rook, we have the
Good.
knight, we have the queen, the king.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay. Yes.
And the bishop.
Then the bishop. So in the game of chess, this is how they are played. And then there's a formation. You have the pawns, P-A-W-N-S, the pawns. They are at the battlefield, okay? They are the front liners. So player A will have pawns, player B will also have a pawns. But that is where, the whole thing begins. So now you see that the pawns will be fighting against each other. I mean, when you are able to conquer the pawns, then you need to contend with other more powerful players, okay? Like the bishops, the kind of tactics that the bishop can do is far more than what the pawns can do. Now you go through and then you reach the knight, which is the last killer before you get to the king, okay, or queen of the other, your opponent. Now, my dear friends, the way the game of chess is arranged depicts or gives you an idea of how medieval war, okay, was arranged. It tells you even how the state will come into being, okay, but it depicts or demonstrates how in the olden days the kingdoms were protected or even war. was fought. That is why, even though in contemporary times we have modern states, now you check out anytime there is a state function, then you see the president's car coming. You will see soldiers sitting on horses flanking the cars, right? Or even when there's parade, you see the soldiers sitting on horses. This is what? A ceremonial function, state function. But then we are trying to go back into those old days, depicting how the kings were protected by knights sitting on horseback. Okay, so then it gives us a reflection of how this arrangement used to be in the olden days, where the kings who were in charge of the political organizations were protected by knights sitting on horseback. And that's why most state functions, when there is an inspection of state parade, you see the knights sitting on horseback to depict medieval European arrangements. Now, but when gunpowder was introduced, it led to an aggressive and competitive arms race in Europe. So all the kingdoms, right, they were trying to get or secure these, gunpowders, these weapons, and what have you. There was an aggressive, competitive arms race in Europe, and each of the existing kingdoms at the time, okay, were obliged to employ administrators, recruit, train and equip, and pay for standing armies. So once there's gunpowder in the system, then there was the need to get, standing armies. So each of the kingdoms will now be recruiting among their people to train them and then to give them these sort of weapons. Then, standing armies were formed. Now, because it involves recruiting people, then you need administrators who will be doing that. Okay, you need administrators that will be recruiting people. You need administrators that will be training these people that you have recruited to become soldiers. And once you have a standing army, you need to train them. You need to pay them maybe weekly, 2 weeks, or monthly. So you needed people that will be engaged in payroll processing. And this arrangement, and you see clearly, once you are paying people, then there is the need for increasing taxation. And so all these organized ways of doing things will lay the foundation for modern bureaucracies. So the thing is that whilst Kingdom A was engaged in this arrangement, Kingdom B was engaged in that, Kingdom C. So at the end of the day, these kingdoms became more or less like uniform with regards to how they were organized. So the idea of a modern bureaucracy like civil service, where they recruit people, they train people, they pay people, that will be the beginning of this arrangement. Now, these political units became larger, and the growth of bureaucracy meant that local patterns of administration and justice became more uniform. The pattern of administration became more uniform, as I mentioned, because Kingdom A was engaged in similar arrangements, securing, arms, ammunition, okay, going through their population to recruit people to train as soldiers, okay, training them, motivating them, okay, paying them at the end of the month, getting registries and all this. There was uniformity across. Now, commerce grew more freely, and rulers began to establish formal diplomatic relations with their overseas counterparts. And so then, relations between these entities will grow over time. Commerce will grow freely, where each of these entities will be trading amongst themselves. Taxation will also be very well organized in order to support the process. Okay. All right. So that will be the key phases in state formation. So also, growth of taxation in order to fund this emerging arrangements. There will be administrative expansion, okay, and that will be the beginning of an organized way of administration. Then you see, now that you have a standing army giving what weapons, then the monopoly over the use of force, right, will become more enhanced, because within the territory you have a standing army giving these artillery, arms, ammunition to defend the political organization. Then the monopoly over the use of force will become more organized. Okay. All right. Are we together? Hello. Now let's proceed. Let's look at Peace of Westphalia and the birth of the modern states. Just as war making weakened the feudal pillar of the medieval framework, Reformation also destroyed the religious foundation. Now, we mentioned last week that you had the transnational Roman Catholic Church dominating several kingdoms across Europe. So even though we had kings and kingdoms and what have you, now these found themselves in a more weaker position. At the super level, you had a bigger force, the transnational Roman Catholic Church controlling, okay, these kingdoms. But the idea of a reformation destroyed this religious foundation. And war also weakened the feudal arrangement of the medieval framework. As Charles Tilly has famously argued that war made the states and the state made war. Okay, war made the state and the state made war. Okay, then his argument simply means that rulers engage in frequent wars, okay, and because of their wars, it would force these kingdoms and rulers to raise more taxes, okay, to build bureaucracies, to recruit soldiers, to train them, to pay them. That is to have organized standing armies, to organize standing armies, and also to strengthen central authority, and that is the monopoly over the use of force in order to be able to defend itself. All right, so that is how this process also took. War making weakened the feudal pillar, which will make the system more organized. Nanajwa, you are making some, unprintable marks on the slide, please. This is from that. The Reformation process also destroyed the religious foundation. You have the likes of Martin Luther, who condemned, the corruption and privileges of the organized church at the time, the transnational Roman Catholic. And this will bring a lot of consequences, okay? A lot of confrontations and agitations, okay, encounters, which with time will shatter the Christian Commonwealth. So there were a lot of conflicts, agitations, hostilities. But the birth of the modern state system is often tied to a single event, which is the 1648 Peace of Westphalia. I always emphasize on this, the 1648 Peace of Westphalia. And note it very well. This is a very important milestone or period in political science, especially in comparative politics and international relations, because this period will be the beginning of the modern international system. Okay, those who study international relations, so then, okay, that will be the beginning of the modern international system, because then states will be given what sovereignty, okay, issues of non-interference and the rest. So then you can clearly examine relations between what states. Now, same as scholars of comparative politics, because that will also be the beginning of the formation of the modern state. Now, this Peace of Westphalia, sometimes we also call it the War of Westphalia, because now all these protests, as Tilly mentioned, war made the states, and the state made war. The Reformation activities, all, okay, they all involve somewhat great hostilities. But this Peace of Westphalia, which involves some series of treaties signed, will bring to an end of the 30-year war, okay, the 30-year war in the Holy Roman Empire. The Peace of Westphalia will bring to an end a 30 years war in the Holy Roman Empire, as well as the 80-year war between Spain and the Dutch Republic. And so these treaties that will end the war will bring about a lot of new arrangements with regards to territory of states, their sovereignty, and then the kind of control that others used to have on other territories. This Peace of Westphalia that was signed, okay, is in a region in Germany, okay, Westphalia, will bring to an end these protracted wars. Okay, now the Peace of Westphalia would have what impacts on this. It made several adjustments to European state borders. So the treaty will make what adjustments. So then there will be clear demarcation of borders or boundaries, okay, where, it will not be prudent for one to interfere in the territory of another. So it made several adjustments, and it gave new definition to the idea of sovereignty. Okay, that within your boundaries or borders, you claim the monopoly of the use of force, and it's not allowed for other power, okay, to control that territory. And so within the confines, within the borders, the governing body or entity will be the one that will have the monopoly of the use of force, or will control every other entity within the territory. That's linked to the third point. It will make national secular authority superior to religious edicts. So within the territory, the national secular authority, if like the government, will be more powerful or superior to any religious, edict from Rome. what it means is that within the territory, the state is more powerful than the church or any other social organization. And this would give rise to what we know, what is referred to as the Westphalian system. So the Peace of Westphalia brought about what is known today as the Westphalian system. Or sometimes we say the Westphalian states. It simply means that that is the arrangement where the state is more powerful than any other entity within its territory, whether the church, traditional authority, or any other. The state is superior. Now, another implication is that several states predated the peace, including England, Ireland, Spain, and then Portugal. But you see, even though these states predated the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, but most of them also had jurisdictions over other territories, even in Europe. But the Peace of Westphalia will bring clear definition to the powers of states, okay, and how they could control other territories. So it gave clear definition of the powers of states, okay. Yeah, so that is one implication of the Peace of Westphalia. And other implications, national self-determination, okay. It also brought a precedent that, well, we could end wars through diplomatic means. It is not always about war that will bring to some logical determination of matters or disputes, but then it brought to the fore, to the forerunner that or it brought to the table that it is not always the time that it is through war that we can settle our differences or disputes, but we can judge through diplomatic processes. Peaceful coexistence among states as the norm, yes, it also brought that implication. And it's brought about, it maintained the balance of power among sovereign states. And then the issue of non-interference in the internal affairs of other sovereign states. This treaty also brought forth to that. Okay, and that's why here I mentioned that it gave clearer. MFA, please mute your microphone. Okay, MFA. All right. Any question, my dear friends? Hello. All right, let's proceed. Yes, Otin. Oh, me. Yes, Otin Frida. Please unmute your mic and then. Okay, all right, let's proceed. All right, so let's look at sovereignty and then consent. Now, we've talked about sovereignty and then how the Treaty of Westphalia, okay, how the Treaty of Westphalia brought about sovereignty, okay. It brought about recognizing the notion of sovereignty, that within the borders of the entities, the states remain the most powerful entity, and that no other. Give me 1 minute. Are we here?
Yes, Prof.
Good. So now within the borders or within the territory, the state is that powerful entity. No other power can compare itself to the powers of the state. The French philosopher Jean Bodin argued that within society, a single sovereign authority should be responsible for 5 major functions. So, and I mean, if you have a society, even though there might be some other entities that have powers, but then there should be a single sovereign authority which should possess some powers responsible for 5 major functions. So, let's take the Ghanaian society for an example. There are different powers within society. Can you mention some different powers within society? Different corridors of power within our society here in Ghana. Yes. Hello. Within Ghana, there are different arrangements that have powers. People obey them. Can you mention some? Hello.
The question again.
Religious leaders.
Yes, religious leaders. Good. Okay, right. Any other? Yes, right. Unmute your mic.
We have the kings.
We have the kings, yes. I mean, in Ghana, we have the kings, religious leaders, and what have you. Okay, but as well as the political authority. Now, Jean Bodin is saying that within society, a single sovereign authority. So even though we have these sort of arrangements, but there should be a single sovereign authority that should what? Be responsible for 5 major functions. And please note it well. That's why I have highlighted in what? Red characters. Bodin says that single sovereign authority performs what? These 5 major functions: legislation, war and peace, public appointments, judicial appeals, and currency. So you see, even though you mentioned some other authorities, they do not have the power to perform all these 5 functions. They do not have. It is only the states that have what? The state that has mandate to execute these rules. Legislation, yes, making laws for everybody to obey. Making laws for every other entity or even what? Organization within to obey. War and peace, very important. Because according to Charles Tilly, war made the state and the state made war. So war and peace, very important as role performed by the sovereign. Public appointments. And you remember that the introduction of gunpowder, when gunpowder was introduced, okay, then there was a need to have standing army, organized with infantry. So clearly, there was the need for even for the kingdoms, or if you like, later the states, to establish what? Registries, or establish an organization or an entity that will be in charge of recruiting people into their services, recruiting people as what? Armed forces, members of the armed forces, getting people that will be training them, getting people that will be engaged in payroll processing, and other state functionaries. That is why public appointment very important. Judicial appeals, yes, justice. So the state will be in charge of judicial appeals. That's why we have the judiciary as one of the key state institutions. We also have currency, right? You see the state will have a Bank of Ghana in charge of currency and regulating everything about, commerce, currency, and currency is used to trade, okay? And it is crucial. Samuel. Yes, Sammy.
Sir, please, it's a question.
Yes, please ask your question.
Please, concerning the treaty, you said the Roman emperor or the Roman Catholic Church or something was the big boss, right?
Yes.
Yes. So how were they able to, convince this power or convince them to, limit them into a smaller power? As in, how did they come into agreement with them?
Yes. So it didn't come through eating and sleeping. It came through war. Okay. And that is why, Charles Tilly mentioned that war made the states, and then the states made war. I mentioned that before then, the kingdoms were still there. The kingdoms, the principalities, the city-state arrangements were there. But the transnational Roman Catholic Church was having the superior, power, controlling these, kingdoms who found themselves in a far weaker position. But through war, as well as the Protestant, activities, okay, and all these were through war, which will, last for, almost 30 years, okay. It was through war. People, the kingdoms were fighting, asserting their authority, their independence, okay, in one form or the other. So the kingdom, or if you like, the empire, was not as peaceful as then. Okay, so there were a lot of hostilities. And so once in 1648, the Peace of Westphalia, and it was part of the arrangement. It was part of the peace, arrangement. Before you go for peace treaty, there are certain conditions like, this should be done, that should be done before, then the war is ended. Okay, like you see, U.S., Iran, they are engaged in war. Sometimes Trump will send his vice and his war people to go and negotiate. They put some things on the table, some conditions on the table. Okay, Iran, if you want us to stop the war or attacking you, you need to stop your nuclear ambition. You need to stop this, stop that. Okay. So if it is appended and approved, then that becomes the order. Samuel, are you fine? Okay, so that arrangement, the new arrangement will come as a result of the war and then the Protestant activities, which will culminate and into some form of war, protracted war, and everything will cease, or will come to some breakthrough through the 1648 Peace of Westphalia or Treaty of Westphalia or War of Westphalia. Okay, are you fine? All right. Where is Samuel?
Sir, please, thank you.
All right. Okay, good. Now, so we have mentioned that, well, we need to have an entity that is very powerful within the states to be performing these 5 major roles far above any other entity within the territory. But some philosophers also argue that, hey, if you make an entity too powerful, then hey, that powerful entity will be chewing the other entities in society. What do you think, Samuelina? Ms. Dakon?
Yes, Prof.
If we make one person or one entity too powerful, what do you think he will do to his colleagues or other entities in society?
You try to take advantage of them.
They will take advantage of them. Okay, good. Right.
They will abuse their power because there's a saying that power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Okay, they will abuse the power. Fantastic. And so scholars like the English philosopher John Locke has said, no, we need to place some limitation on the powers of the states. That sovereign entity need to be subject to limits. There should be some brakes. You know, if a car doesn't have brake, or well, if a bicycle or motor doesn't have brake, and then it is speeding, nothing can stop it. Hey, the state, we need to have some brakes, some control mechanisms that the state will not unduly interfere in the private sphere or the freedoms of the people because they think they are all that powerful. So John Locke has argued that there should be somewhat limits to the powers of the sovereign. Now, let me use this example. You see, some people, there was a time that an individual brought tiger in his home as a pet. Then the neighbors were agitated. Say, hey, how can you bring tiger into a residential area? And then the person said, oh, this tiger is harmless. And for that matter, he has tamed the tiger. What does it mean when we say you have tamed the tiger?
Make it harmless.
Made it harmless. Okay, good. What are some of the things you would do to a tiger that will render it harmless?
Always make sure that it is satisfied.
Sure. Can you satisfy? No, this one. But look, give me another point.
Raise it from infancy.
You will do what?
Raise it from
infancy. Regularly.
You will do it. What?
Raising it from infancy.
But how? How will you raise it from infancy? Because when they grow, they will know that they have grown. So how do you? Yes, Sammy.
Tranquilize it.
To make it what?
You sedate it or you tranquilize it.
Hey, Charlie, I like it, but the English, Charlie, break it down so that everybody understands. I think you have the point, but break it down. Use everyday English. What do you do to the tiger? But what does a tiger use to attack people?
The power and the teeth.
Okay,
You turn it into a herbivore.
So Deron, yes, Deron.
So remove its teeth.
Yeah, that could be a way. So you can remove the teeth when it is young, made by what? The teeth in it. What else does it use?
It's power.
It's power. It's power. The paws, like the claws. The claws. If you like, you see what they are like, the nails. Maybe you do something to it that, well, they cannot outgrow. Then you know that, well, but.
Pastor.
Yes.
Please, we have so many, harmless tigers that have these paws, teeth, but they will still not harm you because of the way they were trained.
The way they were trained, okay. So by way of training, well, if we can be safe being with them, or you see, sometimes when people are acting movie, and then because everything is scripted, they say, oh, okay, you will carry the snake. In the script, we have written that the snake will not bite you. Then someone will say, but does the snake know that in the script it says it will not bite me? So, well, if we can be convinced that the training will make the tiger know that, well, at all times it should not. But once these parts capable of harming are there, then people cannot. You need to be with it with caution. Okay, Blessing, you've raised your hand. Yes, Blessing. Unmute your mic, please. Yes, Blessing. Unmute your mic, please.
I wanted to ask, like, if they move their teeth, how would it feel? Like, how would it eat? I wanted to ask.
Well, I mean, but you see, this one, let's leave it to those who are into, animals and right? Maybe veterinary people, Yeah, we are not doing technical assessment, but the point we are trying to raise is that there should be some arrangement put in place to make sure that their tendencies to harm people, okay, is curtailed. That is what we're trying to say. But as for how it should be done, we leave it for the technical people. Yeah, but the point we're trying to say is that we need to put in place mechanisms that they are unable to harm. Now, let's export this arrangement to the state argument. Now, the state is powerful. How can we tame the states? How can we limit the powers of the state? In other words, how do we control it so that it doesn't grow to become the tiger that will be eating even its masters? The people gave the power to the states. And so the people are the principals, okay, and the state is the agent. How do we ensure that the state will not become too powerful and be eating their masters or their principals? And that is what John Locke sought to do. That, well, you see, the people gave their powers, through the social contract theory, that the state will protect them. Okay, and the people or the citizens, they have some natural rights. Right to life, right to liberty, their freedoms, and the right to own properties. And it is as a result of these things, that's why they gave their powers to the state to protect these natural rights. Now, these rights were not given by the state. These are natural rights given by nature, okay? The state is there to guarantee or to protect them. The state must protect these rights. And insofar as the state is protecting these rights, the citizens must obey and support the state to do that. But if the state would want to interfere in these natural rights, the people have every right to reject and to oppose the states vehemently. Okay, all right. That is what John Locke argues. Now, the control of the sovereignty is by consent. John Locke argues that control of the sovereignty is by consent. Now, Locke argues citizens agree to obey the laws of the land and, of course, the state. Insofar as the laws protect their lives, their freedoms, and their properties, the citizens agree to obey the laws. But if rulers violate the citizens' natural rights, and what are the natural rights? Mention them for emphasis. What are the natural rights?
Right to live.
Okay, right to live. Yes. Which other?
Right to own property.
Own property.
Right for movement.
Movement. So all put together, liberties, right? Those freedoms. Okay. So now, if rulers violate these, natural rights, the people are thereupon absolved from any further obedience and left to the common refuge which God has provided for all men against force and violence, the right to resist. And so, you see, this is what philosophy, and this is like political theory. Political theory. Those who be reading law, this forms part of natural law. If there's any law that will seek to curtail the freedoms of people with regards to their properties, freedoms, or even their right to live, well, some philosophers like John Locke will say that the people can resist. They can resist, through demonstration, protest, to challenge the authority of the state. And you have seen a lot of this. Now, in Locke's work, we see a modern account of the liberal state with sovereignty limited by consent. Now, anytime you hear consent, Faustina, please mute your microphone. Derry Faustina. Faustina, are you with us? Okay, let me remove her from the class. Just remove. I've removed her from the class. I've removed her from the class. Now, once you hear consent, consent means what? Agree. Okay? Agree. Or affirmation. So you hear what silence means consent. If I say, oh, can I take your, can I use your pen? And then you don't object to it. You don't object. It means there's some kind of an affirmation. You've agreed, consent. Silence means what? Consent. Oh, all right. So the control of the sovereignty is by consent. Once the people agree or affirm the rules, the doings, the activities of the state, then it makes the state powerful. But if the state says sleep and the people are saying, no, we no go sleep, they are also what? Agitating. Then it's like they are reducing the sovereignty of the state, okay? And well, once the state is protecting the three, natural rights, the people need to obey, okay? But if they are going contrary, want to oppress the people, their liberties forcefully, take their freedoms, their properties, and make things detrimental to their lives, then they may use what? They may resist. So that is the account of the liberal states with sovereignty limited by consent. Please note this very well, okay? Now let's look at the growth in the numbers and spread of modern states. We have already mentioned that the modern idea of the state emerged in Europe between the 16th and 18th century, okay, with the use of the word states as a political term coming into common use during this period. Now let's see how the numbers of states grew over time. Today, how many states do we have? Last week, I asked this question. Today, how many states do we have?
It depends.
It depends, right? It depends. But roughly, so give me one of the description and then mention one of the figures. If you are to go by the declarative theory, you can talk about over 200 states. Okay, the declarative theory, we could have over 200 states. But if we are to go by the constitutive theory, then we go by the 195 membership of the UN or the 193 of membership, okay? You know, we will talk about this details towards the end of this slide. It's a whole discussion where I pose the question, how many states do we have? But you see, the number of states grew slowly. There were only 19 states in existence by 1800, and barely 30 more had been established by 1900. So you see, by 1900, a little over 30 states were in existence. Most of the territories you see today were part of some kind of empires, or were having somewhat arrangements, maybe as colonial entities, okay? Colonial entities. At a global level, the real expansion of state system only began after the Second World War, as decolonization saw the end of most of the European empires, right? So the period after the Second World War, the formation of the UN, as well as decolonization. So that's why, you see, in comparative politics, for you to understand the phenomenon, you can go to G. Peters' 5 Eyes. So right now, I've mentioned what the international environment at the time. After the Second World War, the formation of the UN, which will lead to some institutional arrangements for ending colonization. And well, within particular colonies, they also mass up. There were some individual and collective actors, some protests, people were agitating for independence, coupled with the international environment, and a whole lot of, if you had freedom fighters like Kwame Nkrumah, massing up, trying to organize the people, and, all these help explain. So many entities that were colonies or part of the European empires will now gain their independence and then become accepted into the international system, by the constitutive or theory. In addition, the number of international organizations and list of international treaties began to grow. Okay, all right. I have a table here. Okay, so here we are. This is the table that denotes the formation of states or the growth in the numbers of states. We have the first wave, okay, the 19th century, which is the period, 1800s, okay. These were some of the states, the Spanish and Portuguese territories of Latin America, states there. The second wave, this was after the end of the First World War. Okay, when was the First World War fought? Which period was that? The First World War. Yes, First World War. Comparativist. So the period 1914 to 1918. Okay, please note it very well. I'll ask this again. That was the First World War between 1914 and 1918. So, around this period, okay, several states will be formed following the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, okay, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire. So states like Austria, Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, now these will be formed from the existing empires. Once empires will break apart, then individual states will be formed, and then will be what? Increasing the number of states. But the largest wave was the third era. The third wave, that was the largest, where you have several states will be formed. So after the Second World War in 1945, that period, okay, with the retreat from the empire by European states, diminished by war, the Second World War weakened these European powers, which were having empires abroad. The French Empire, the British Empire. The Second World War will weaken them, will weaken most of these European powers, such that the ability to control their foreign territories became weaker. So the least effort from the locals, the least national protest from these colonies, their masters will grant them independence. So this will begin in Philippines in 1946, and then a year later in India, 1947, gaining their independence. Once that would occur, then they became what? Sovereign states. These were the first to achieve independence, but many other colonies in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Middle East followed suit. Between 45 and 89, nearly 90 independent states. So that was the largest wave. A lot of states were formed between 45, the end of the Second World War, and then 1989, following the collapse of the Soviet Union. You see, about 90 states. Now, the fourth one and the final wave, which was the final decade, the dissolution of the communist bloc, when the communist bloc, you remember when we were talking about the Cold War typology. The Cold War typology, how many worlds did we have? Yes, comparativists. How many worlds did we have? Yes. How
Three.
many? The three. The second was what? The second world comprises so you see, the second world comprised the communist bloc, the Soviet Union, right? Communist bloc. Now, 89 and early 1990s, this will crumble. There will be a dissolution of the communist bloc. And several states will come out of the Soviet Union, including Ukraine. And so, Russia, the Russian Empire, will dissolve into 15 successor states. When you read international law, you understand successor states, But once the empire broke apart, several entities would emerge from that empire, including Ukraine, Belarus, Russia itself, Estonia, and a whole lot of states. And so then you know that with time, the number of states globally will be increasing. Will be increasing. Are we together? Hello? All right. Any question? Any question for me? Let's look at era of warfare and era of welfare. Now we've talked about First World War. When was it fought? Again, when was it fought? The First World War.
1914 to 1918.
Okay, good. And then the Second World War.
1939 to 1945.
Fantastic. So the First and Second World Wars, okay, were examples of total war, fought between entire countries rather than just or between specialized armed forces. Okay, and these were protracted periods. For example, between 1914 and 18, very what? A long period. 1939 to 45, long period. And so, fighting the war is very expensive. That's why all the time you'll be hearing the president of Ukraine. What is his name?
Putin.
Hey, Ukraine, not Russia.
Hey.
Zelensky.
Yes, Zelensky. Yes, Zelensky. So at all times, you see, he will be calling out his European partners. Hey, I am losing out. You need to, show support. You push me into this, and then the support is not forthcoming. The artillery, the ammunitions, the resources. War is very expensive. And so to fight 14 to 1918, 39 to 40. Now this would require a lot of resources, like tanks, planes, bombs, which required unparalleled mobilization of citizens, taxes, taxation. So the more we are fighting, the more we need to tax the people to be able to fund the war. So the ability to tax effectively and systematically has been the central pillar of state capacity. When we talk of state capacity, whether you are a rich state or you are strong militarily, or in terms of your significance at the international level, it depends on your ability to tax and mobilize resources. This is argued by Rotterdam Metal. Rotterdam Metal 2008. The central pillar of state capacity is your ability to tax effectively and systematically. So if you are a state and then your informal sector, you cannot plan and then tax them. They do one work and they take huge money, sometimes over 10,000, like a carpenter, mason, tiler, plumber. They take over 8,000, 7,000. But then they are outside the direct tax brackets. You cannot tax them because they are in the informal and you are not coming out with innovative measures to tax. So every time you don't have enough resources, you only tax those who work in the formal sector, like government workers, those in the private sector. But those in informal who, for majority of your workforce, you cannot tax them, limiting your ability to mass up for resources. Now, because total wars were expensive, tax revenues also needed to expand. Okay, so during the era of warfare, there was massive taxation, but the taxation was to fund the wars. Now, following the end of the war, finally, when peace broke in 1945, which would be the end of the Second World War. Now, the state will not stop the taxation. No, we still needed the resources because the war had devastated much of European states. Some people who were working had lost their jobs, and many did not have jobs. Some companies had collapsed, and so clearly some people had come home. And so the taxation was still needed in order to rebuild the state. So rather, they would channel these taxes, to enhance the restructuring of the state. This is what we call era of welfare. So after the World War, there was era of welfare. where the resources were channeled towards what reinvigorating the system, so that the state will directly come in to support some individuals and then some organizations. You know that in these European systems, they usually believe in individualism, capitalism, okay? But after the World War II, you realize that a lot of harm or devastation had been done. And so then they would have to come up with some kind of post-war settlement or reconstruction where the state will come in to support, okay, to protect their citizens. So we say that the warfare state gave way to the welfare state, where rulers accept what? Direct responsibility for protecting their citizens from the scourges of illness, unemployment, and old age. So the state interfered to protect these people from our vulnerabilities. This will become known as the Keynesian welfare state because the process was named after the British economist John Maynard Keynes. So we call it the Keynesian welfare state, where the state came in to support people who had become unemployed, people who were sick, and a whole lot of post-war reconstruction. It integrated full employment and public welfare with an economy in which the private sector continued to play a substantial part. So whilst the private sector was playing its role, okay, the capitalism was playing, but the state also intervened in some aspects, okay. Any question, my dear friends? Otherwise, let's look at patterns of state formation. Patterns of state formation. We have mentioned that, well, there have been 4 waves with regards to how states were formed over time, okay? But there have been at least 5 different patterns with state formation. Through absolutist kinship. This is one of the patterns of state formation. There are some states that were formed through absolutist kinship pattern. Now, I mentioned that with the absolutist kinship, the state would come into being. They obtain their independent power by building up armies and bureaucracies solely responsible to the monarchs. Okay. During the discovery of gunpowder, and then the kingdoms were massing up in the arms race at the time, trying to secure these ammunitions, weapons, and will form organized infantry, artilleries to protect the kings in the kingdoms. Having standing armies, getting the bureaucracy in charge of the recruitment or public appointment, paying for the standing army, which will be the beginning of organized bureaucracy, solely responsible to the monarch. This was one pattern that the state would take. So as they grew in uniformity, now this is the absolutist kinship. So you had the king, now having the army with the bureaucracy. That is the pattern, absolutist kinship, very powerful. And so when the state will be formed, the state will take that pattern. So take France, for example. You take the French system, the state is very powerful vis-a-vis the citizens, because it took the absolutist kinship. The king shared no powers with any other entity. And so the state has taken that format, that shape, so powerful vis-a-vis its society. Now, we also have another pattern, kingship-facing judges and representative bodies. Now, with this pattern of state formation, you had kingship, but the kings were not given absolute powers because the kings faced some kind of opposition from society. That's why we've named it like kingship-facing judges and representative bodies. Now, let's take the case of England. England used to have powerful kings, okay? But with time, the powers of the kings were not made absolute. No, they faced some hostilities from the people. So take England, for example. The kings were forced to sign the Magna Carta. The kings were forced or compelled to sign what they call Magna Carta. The Magna Carta will make the kings also what? Follow the rules, which may suggest that they are not absolutely or powerful. Okay, they were compelled by the barons. Okay, the barons, and then the privileged in society to sign what they call the Magna Carta, some kind of agreement, which means that the kings were not absolute kings. They didn't have absolute powers because they had signed, they had been compelled to sign. So relative powers between the kings and then the people in society or groups in society, the kings were not so powerful in that regard. And within them, and so when the state will be formed, that was the pattern the state will also take. The state will not be too powerful vis-a-vis the other entities in society or their representative bodies. So if you go to England today, even as the state is formed, it took that pattern. The state, if you like, take the prime minister, okay, as being the head of government. Or if you take the head of states, the head of state will have what? Parliament to contend with. The state has the representative bodies to contend with. So with regards to the relative power between the executive and the representative bodies being the parliament, you see that the parliament is more powerful even than the executive, okay? Because it took that format or pattern. Now the third pattern is state formation from below through confederation and then or federation. So with this pattern, well, you had what? You had existing entities, existing territories, having their own kind of arrangements, but decided to come together to unify, okay? Maybe for some kind of protection. It will either be a confederation or a federation. Confederation or a federation. Now you talk of a confederation when the powers given to the center is not too powerful. The powers given to the center is not too powerful. Well, a group of people or territories have come together. Let me use the US for example. Let's say 50 entities have come together, but each of them would want to maintain their power. That is a confederation. It will be loose at the center. Do you know Captain Planet? Hello? You watch Captain Planet?
Yes.
Let our powers
Yes, Prof.
combine. What are the powers? Now let our powers combine. Water. What else?
Earth.
What? Wind, water, fire, earth, geoplanet. And the geoplanet that is the Captain Planet that is formed, you see, is a very powerful entity. You know, Captain Planet, he can do a lot of things, but he's formed from the powers of our 5 entities. That is what? A federation. So they have what? Given all their powers to a bigger entity called Captain Planet. Very powerful. But let's say that wind, the water, earth, and fire, they want to come together, but then we still want to see water, we still want to see wind, we still want to see earth. No, then it will not come to the formation of a bigger and powerful entity, Captain Planet. But then we are going to see a bit of water, a bit of fire, a bit of this. No, that is a confederation. So now, even though you have what smaller entities coming together, maybe to ensure protection, but if it's a federation, then it means that the center is not giving more powers. No, the individuals will still want to retain their separate powers. That is not possible. You cannot eat your cake and have it. Okay, so yes, the US started with that, but it didn't help them. Now they will form a federation where they will give out more powers to the center so that the separate units, the separate states will find themselves in a more subordinate position to give more powers to the center, okay? I mean, to the central US administration, now headed by Trump. But you see, each of the 50 states, they have their own governors, they have their own arrangements, but they have given greater powers to their center. So that is one pattern of state formation, where you have some autonomous entities, coming together to form a centralized units, okay, to ensure their own protection. Why was the US formed? These entities will come together to enhance or promote their protection. We also have another pattern through conquest or unification. This one, by fire, by force, okay? Entity will conquer the other and then will join. Okay, that's why we say conquest or through unification. So unification or conquest, the state of Germany and then Italy, they picked this pattern of state formation. Now the final one is state formation through independence. This one is, you remember that the third wave, we had over 90 states becoming states through what? Independence. Can you give example from Africa? any states that became what? States through independence? Any example closer to you? Yes. Hello. Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello, sir.
Any example of states that was formed through independence?
Ghana.
Ghana, good. Any other?
Nigeria.
Okay, so that is state formation through independence, right? So when most of these empires would break up, most of these that were colonies, as you have mentioned, the experience of Ghana, Nigeria, and most of African states. All right. Good. Are we there? Hello?
Hi.
Yes.
Why is it raining at your
Yes,
end?
Prof.
You appear too cold. Are you cold, ladies and gentlemen? We have 30 minutes. Hello?
Yes.
All right. Now let's look at diversity of states, ladies and gentlemen. Diversity of states. Now, I mentioned from the start of this particular slide or lecture that states differ. Even though we are talking about states, there are several states formed through different patterns, at least one of the 5 patterns. But you see, we have what? Over 190 states if you are to use the constitutive theory. You can also have about 200 states if you are to use the declarative theory. But the states are diverse. They demonstrate somewhat diversity. They are not uniform. Some states are too large or very populous. For example, China. China has what? Over 1.4 billion. What is the population of Ghana? Yes, my dear friends, Ghana.
30 million.
34 million.
Yes, around 34 million.
That's right.
Around 33, 34 million. Now, contrast that with China, 1.4 billion. 1.4 billion, not million. 1.4 billion. And this population is greater than that of 160 smaller countries. So when you take over 160 countries, put their population together, they cannot even match the population of just one state, China. And that tells you that states are diverse. Now, some states are also very small. We call them microstates. And these are mainly islands in the Caribbean, Pacific, or off the African coast. Okay, with some 5 European states, including the Vatican City. You look at. So while some states are very populous in terms of size and population, others are also very tiny in terms of their size and then population. Example of these states are Andorra, Barbados, Palau, and then the Maldives. These are microstates. Now, look at it this way. Which country is the most populous globally? Tell me, which country is most populous?
China.
India.
India.
Yeah, India.
India, China, India, China. Well, you see, now China used to be the most populous, okay? China had been the most populous, but we had projected that looking at China's birth rate and that of India's birth rate, comparativists had predicted that India was likely to overtake China. So from 1970, China's population had been the highest all the way through the 2020s to 2021 thereabout. And India had been number 2, but we had projected that India would overtake China. So comparativists had projected by 2023 it's likely that India would overtake China. That is why some of you were mentioning China, others were mentioning India. But those who mention China, it means you need to update your notes, okay? You need to update your notes. Now, India overtakes China to become most populous state. This was well established, well declared by the UN as of 24th April 2023 in the UNDESA policy brief number 153 with the heading, India overtakes China as the world's most populous country. So if I ask you today, what is the most populous state, my dear comparativist? What is it?
India.
Yes, it is incontrovertible, okay? There should be no other answer but to say what? In India. All right, so here we are. Most populous states. If you have what? India with over 1.435 billion. China followed closely by China with over 1.425, right? Followed by US, US, Indonesia, Pakistan, Nigeria. You see Nigeria here, Brazil too. These are the most populous states. So when you see that, you need to salute them. Which African state do you find there?
The country without stable electricity.
Nigeria.
All right.
The country without stable electricity.
Brazil.
So now you see the 10 most populous states. All right, India, of course, 31 point something percent. China also 31 point something. They are almost equal, just that some few margins, followed by US. So you see the third country doesn't come closer to the first two. Okay, the first two there, you see their margin so huge, so populous, followed by US, just for 7%. All right, but these are also the smallest countries. These are the smallest countries. We have Vatican, which is Holy See. So Vatican is a member of the UN. When you check UN, you see what? Holy See. Okay, Holy See, that's the government of Vatican, Holy See. These are essentially clergymen. Least populous. You also have others here, the Tokilu, and then most of these are islands. Very tiny states. You have the Vatican City with a little over 800 people. And this is a state, okay? But you know their membership is even or less than students of Poly 214. Is that not correct? If I put city campus, which is over 300, to main campus, which is over 700, so we are more than the whole state. Now take another state called Nauru. Now, if you take Nauru, this population is far less than University of Ghana students. In fact, all the states here, I think they are less than University of Ghana, but these are states. Okay, and that tells you the contrast. Some are, micro, but that's also. All right, these are micro states which are members of the UN. Andorra is a micro state. Population far less than University of Ghana. If we put the students and then the staff together, they cannot match University of Ghana. This is Andorra. Now, Andorra finds itself closer to France, Spain. They do most of their things with France and then Spain. Andorra. We also have Liechtenstein, okay? Can find it around Switzerland, Austria. They do most of their things with these two states. They have 40,000 population, far less than students of University of Ghana. Monaco, you might think it is even part of France. They do most of their things. Most of their things are done by the French. Okay. Okay, we also have San Marino. Okay, great. These are members of UN, but they are very micro states. These are their flags. You have Andorra, Luxembourg, San Marino, Malta, Vatican City, Monaco. Now, all these are micro states. You can find them in the world. Any question, my dear friends? Now, let's look at classification of states based on their political authority. Based on political authority, we can classify states into two. We have what? Quasi-states and de facto states. Quasi-states and de facto states. You see, political authority, whether the state has authority or sovereignty. Now, based on that, we can have two, whether it's a quasi-state or de facto state. Now, quasi-states, these states exist and are recognized under international law. That is why when I began this lecture, I brought my international law cap for you to understand it very well. When you have a teacher who is also, international law, students, it makes it very balanced. Now, these states are recognized under international law. So, well, by law, they are states. They are even recognized by the constitutive or theory of statehood. They have been admitted. They've been admitted. But their governments control little of the territory under their jurisdiction. Okay? When you go there today, so by law, they have a territory, a huge territory. But you go there today, the government is unable to control all its territory. The government controls only a little portion of the territory. If you go to Somalia today, the government controls just a little portion of its territory. So even though by international law, all the territory belongs to them, but if you go there today, you will see that there are other powers controlling some of the territories of Somalia. The government controls what little. The government has what, just a little portion of their territory under their jurisdiction. Now, these are sometimes referred to as fragile states. Fragile states. They have limited control over their territory. So their sovereignty has been questioned by other entities within their own territory. And so they are fragile states. They don't have the state capacity to maintain their overall territories. So a typical example is is Somalia, right? Now let's look at de jure. De jure recognition as a sovereign state by the international community. So, these quasi-states, they have de jure recognition as sovereign states by the international community. Okay, yeah, they are members of the UN, like Somalia, having the established by the constitutive theory. So it means they have that wider recognition as such. Yet they are unable to control their territory. We also have de facto weakness. Well, even though they have that legal recognition, in practice, they are weak in terms of their governance. They have a de facto weakness. The central government does not effectively control large parts of the territory. There is the presence of non-state actors, separatists of regions or rival governments within the borders. So go to Somalia today, you will see all these. Some non-state actors claiming control over some of jurisdictions, some territories. You have a separate state forming within the region of Somalia. We call it a separatist or region, or rival governments within the borders. You even have rebels controlling some parts. That is quasi-state. So this is Somalia. You see Somalia, their map looks like 7. Look, this is Somalia. Before their civil war, check the whole of this. And do you see my cursor moving? Do you see my cursor? Hello?
Yes, Prof.
Before the civil war, the whole of this looking like 7. That is
Yes,
Somalia. The government controlling all this. But after the civil war, look at Somalia, so fragmentalized. The different colors demonstrate or depict that different forces control different parts of Somalia. Okay, you have Somaliland, forming around this area, which is a new state formed by the declarative theory of statehood controlling here. Then you have some rebels controlling certain portions, and then you have the state or the central government controlling only a small portion that is closer to the capital. And between the area controlled by the state and then the rebel forces, you have a buffer region, okay, where some joint UN, AU, ECOWAS forces, joint AU and UN forces controlling the buffer area, okay. All right, so here, this is it. Now, you see the map of Somalia again here, right? Do you see it? Hello? So today, if you go to Somalia, it's only the green area that is effectively controlled by Somalia. Now you have this area. Now it is a self-declared independence. It's a new state formed by the declarative theory called Somaliland. They also control that. Then between Somalia and Somaliland, we have a disputed area. That's a buffer area. Now, if you go to Somalia today, now this area is controlled by rebel forces, Al-Shabaab. This is their base. You hear Mogadishu. Now, between the area controlled by Al-Shabaab and then the state of Somalia, we have this area, which is African Union government control, that buffer zone. AU forces are the ones controlling. Okay, so this is what? This is a quasi-state. This is a quasi-state. All right, my dear friends, we will end here. Next week, we will continue with de facto states. Any question for me before we end the class? Any question? Yes. Okay. In the absence of any question, let me thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen, so that you can prepare for your next class. Let's meet on Thursday. Group B. I'm meeting Group B on Thursday in person. Those who may want to have a feel or experience of the in-person class, please, you are free to join on Thursday, right? Okay. Enjoy your week and see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Prof. Bye, Prof.
Bye.